Okay, welcome to another Cassandra Voices podcast. We're here today to reflect on the results of the Italian election that are coming in today, which are recording a major victory for the right-wing coalition led by the brothers of Italy. Meloni is their leader, but it also involves the former, Berlusconi's party, Forza Italia, and another far-right party, La Lega. So I'm here with two Italians, one based in Ireland and another based in Italy, who are both a little bit depressed by what has happened. So I'll start with you, Massimiliano Galli, living in northern Tuscany.
I was just checking on the results region by region of these last elections, and there are two historically left-wing regions in Italy, which are Emilia-Romagna and Tuscany. And the cool thing about where I'm located is that I am at the cross border between Liguria, Toscana, and Emilia-Romagna. The part where I am is the only part of Tuscany that has always been in the hands of right-wing political parties. For me personally, as an Italian citizen, I lived with you in Ireland for 10 years almost, and it's the least surprising electoral vote I've ever experienced, because the dynamics of the last few years were leading us towards this direction. The first attempt was to contain Salvini, and that was pretty successful thanks to the five-star movement that became this huge political figure. When the last government fell, we had this very unprecedented situation where all the political parties joined the Governo Draghi, and with the exception of Giorgia Meloni, which very strategically did this very mild, moderate opposition to that government to use this thing as a tool for the next election. Because there is only one certain thing in Italy, which is the right-wing electors and parties will always be together when there is a coalition to be made. And this was very clear. So everybody was expecting Meloni to be on an opposition that she would have claimed to say, hey, I was the only one against the Draghi government. And that's exactly what happened. And basically, she took all the votes of the right-wing people that decided to vote for the five-star movement in the last elections. And if you make a very easy calculation with numbers, you can see that all the right-wing electors of five-star movement that were deluded by the center-right, they were now deluded by the five-star movement, and they gave their vote back to the center-right coalitions, which obviously succeeded with this great success of Giorgia Meloni, that obviously could claim an opposition to the Draghi government and all the previous governments, but she can count still on a good 16% of right-wing parties like Berlusconi. Surprisingly, he's still there. He's a Highlander of Italian politics. He is definitely taking the heritage of Andreotti and all these political figures, like mythological political figures. So there's still 3 million Italian people voting for Berlusconi, and that's pretty much the same number of people that voted for Salvini, and these led us to these results.
Okay, good. Okay, from your perspective in Ireland, what changes do you see happening in Italy in this next government, Daniele, Idini?
Now, first of all, because, let's say, Meloni represents a larger European coalition of conservative, European conservative parties. The news that Meloni, Fratelli d'Italia would have be the first party in Italy and win the election under a coalition was taken from Europe, is being looked at from the international community as a possible dangers up to a point. Now, having said that, because of this reason, I guess that there will be the need from Meloni's government to get a bit of a legitimization of her party. So I don't see big changes in the international politics, like European Union or the role of Italy in the European Union or in NATO. Exactly because, let's say, Berlusconi in this case, it's kind of guaranteeing the European and Atlantic alliance, even though we all know Berlusconi's friendship with Putin. Anyway, but it really depends. Like from the number that we are looking at in terms of like composition of the parliament, we can see anyway the center right, because of his coalition, is gaining the majority of seats, and therefore they will have considerable power to change things. But as every time that happens in Italy, not much will change for the ordinary person, unfortunately. And normally the kind of cyclic process that happens is that everybody votes for change. Italians like to vote the new thing, even though behind the new thing there is the same people from the last 20, 30 years. And then cyclically, people don't like how they govern. And then cyclically, the next election, there will be another new thing that will come up. We've seen that with Renzi. The Renzi phenomena, then there was the last leader of the Democratic Party that has any weight as a leader in a way. Then we saw that with the Salvini, the Lega, that went from 30% in just a few years to what today is 8% result. So that's where it's quite a drop. And then Meloni went from 12%, I think, was to 26 now.
Is this a protest vote?
To be honest, the only protest is the only protest vote that I see here. Well, definitely there is an element of that, but also there are two things that need to be considered. One is the level of abstentionism that for the Italian political election is the biggest one since the Republic, even though it's still aligned with all the major Western democracy, which is like 40% average on the abstentionism. So, but normally in the political elections, Italy has always quite been a virtuous country in terms of attendance, while this year we see a considerable drop from last time. But we also seeing there is also another aspect, which is the electoral law that was implemented in 2017, which it's very important to put into consideration, because from people abroad in Italy, they ask how the electoral system works in Italy, and it's at the moment there is an extremely complex system, a majoritarian and a proportional mixed together to get the seats in parliament. For non-Italians, we really need to explain, we do not vote for the president of the government. We are not voting for the government. In Italy, we vote for the parliament. We vote for the seats in the Senate and the seats in the Chamber of Deputies. And then they elect a government, and then they present to the President of the Republic the name of the Prime Minister and the cabinet, basically. But the way that this electoral law is designed, it was, some say that it was a law mainly against the Five-Star Movement, because this law particularly advantaged the coalitions and as instead of the single party. So the rise of the Five-Star Movement back then in 2017, and even Lega as a single party, in a way was put at bay through this law, which favors only coalitions. And as Massi said, the far right, but the right, which composed also by the far right, sorry the Freudian slip, but the far right,
you can say right, that there are many political figures, anyway, journalists in Italy that are starting to name them right and not center right.
The right-wing parties have been, despite their differences and despite the big difference in every point, I don't know how they're going to govern together, but despite many differences between their points, they always been able to create a very strong coalition, while instead the left wing has always been a little bit more fragmented, and especially the rupture between the Democratic Party and the Five-Star Movement is especially bad for this election. As Cacciari just said on the radio there before, it's like the Democratic Party has been playing a game of cards with the rules of another game of cards. The Democratic Party basically played, the last few years, not in the last couple of months, but in the last few years, played a game without considering the actual electoral law. So they didn't mind to completely break with the third strongest party in Italy, which is the five-star movement anyway.
So it's probably a familiar story of sort of more ideological left-wing parties falling out over sort of details, sort of egos coming in the way, or, you know, things like that. But what it suggests, and what the sort of political history of Italy suggests, is that there's a large protest vote, and that suggests that there's a lot of social exclusion. And so when our stereotype of Italy, in Ireland anyway, is of the good life, beautiful cities, beautiful food, beautiful women, beautiful cars, the kind of Italian dream, and beautiful men, of course, Massi. But
not today,
you know,
not today.
but clearly there's a undercurrent of resentment and unhappiness in Italy. So you live there. Can you explain it, Massi?
Well, I don't know if we will have time enough to make a proper analysis, and for sure there's people that is much better than me on doing that, but I can tell you what is my perception. For example, Five-Star Movement, when was elected, made this battle on giving a reddito di cittadinanza, which is the social welfare, and Italy was one of the few Western Europe country without a proper social welfare system. That was the polar star for that, you know, and that was a vote of protest because it was centered on helping the people that was left behind by the system. And the problem in Italy is that we have a very low hourly rate for salaries, one of the lowest in Europe. And we are at the same time the only country that I've ever seen that the citizens complain about the political party that wants to create a social welfare system that is actually helping people for real. And this is to answer Danny was surprised by how good the Five-Star Movement did. The Five-Star Movement did well because they want to protect this thing. And even though I try to listen carefully of what Giorgia Meloni is saying, that what she wants to do, like the first thing she said on a rally that I heard was that they want to abolish this social welfare system. And many entrepreneurs in Italy are using this as the reason why it's so hard to find workers. And they were saying that Italians prefer to stay on the couch. And
just to come across, you mean the social assistant check, basically? The
reddito di cittadinanza, yeah.
The social welfare in Italy is called the reddito di cittadinanza, which is basically citizen income scheme.
But at the same time, I assume that the Brothers of Italy and La Lega have a solid working class voter, you know, who benefits from social welfare payments.
Yeah, as I was saying, that's the weirdness
the paradox
of this place. It's a paradox because we are like many people are condemning this form of help from the government because clearly we would like to have a better job system, a better salary system that is very, very, very non-aligned with the rest of Europe. Everywhere you go in Europe, you have a much bigger salary. And there's also these other, since you were talking about stereotypes, these stereotypes that we are noticing coming back to our country is that Italians are actually working a lot. We take breaks, we take holidays and all these kind of things, but the workers, especially the lowest classes, like the jobs like in hospitality and all these type of things, we have salaries that are probably the half of what you do in Ireland for the same amount of hours. So this is, and I'm repeating this from years, this is the first thing to fix in Italy. So a party like Five-Star Movement wanted to first fix the problem of the poorest parts of the society, and then implementing this system with a new system of, hiring and a new system of governative jobs offered to these unemployed people. Rather than receiving the money, we give you a job. But these, and somebody, I don't remember who last night in the television, I don't remember which journalist was saying this very correctly, that Germany took 12 years to implement this system and to make it work. And if we think about the Reddito di Cittadinanza as a beginning of this process, it's very young. It's like it has a 2 or 3 years life, like it's not even halfway through a process of becoming not just a mere system to help people, but it's the beginning of a process to find a job and to have an assistance from the government. So a party like Fratelli d'Italia, Brothers of Italy, of Giorgia Meloni starts destroying these. And I don't see these as a very intelligent thing. I mean, they could have said, we want to change it and make it work better. But no, they just want to destroy that and start something that they only know, because I still don't have a perfect clarity of what they want to do for this country.
I'm not
very unclear,
yeah,
even to their electors.
I am not sure that they, we have to wait and see, but I am not that sure that the first things that they will do is to change that part, because as much as it is criticized, it's after the impact of the pandemic and the current situation. The reddito di cittadinanza is the citizen income, is basic citizen income. It's a tool of containment of an extreme danger to have, we have 20% of the Italian population, according to the statistics, are at the verge to fall into absolute poverty. So what I see is that, being the first step of a longer process where, for example, minimum wage is established, which is not in Italy, and other measures that would fix the systemic dysfunction of the labor market in Italy, definitely that process might go on a halt, might slow down under a right-wing coalition. But you also have to consider that this vote, there are a couple of things which is, they won, especially because the election law favors coalitions, but you have to consider the stability of the country. And again, we see a result that in appearance gives a definite mandate to a certain coalition to form a government and govern for the entire duration of the next legislation. But if we look under the bonnet, we see the Lega, the second party of the coalition, basically had such a poor result that the leadership of Salvini is in question, has been in question for a while, but now is definitely in question. And we will see what that will entail. And nobody really knows if they're going to, keep the coalition together for the entire legislation. So we might see some surprises from the upside. And the thing is, we hoped for a definite vote, in a way, for a definite result that would solve the problem of Italy political instability, which is, I don't remember the last legislation where there was one government that governed for the entire legislation. I don't think we had any, definitely in recent years. So that problem is not solved. And for the international community, that's the biggest problem, no matter who goes up, left or right. Is Italy able to, govern for a certain amount of years without going to political crisis all the time? And, we still don't, as far, they're all unite, but they're not. Their programs are different. Salvini is against the sanctions to Putin. Forza Italia is for the sanctioning Putin, but Berlusconi is one of the best friends of Putin. We don't, Meloni was less Europe, has always campaigned against Europe, and now she's totally, she's okay with Europe, but she doesn't say too loud. It's very, and then behind them, if you look at the cabinets that have been proposed, we have the same people that basically were with Berlusconi about 15 years ago. So it's far from being a vote that gives Italy any credibility.
You don't think it's a decisive? You don't think it's a decisive result?
No, I don't think, and I don't think also because we see that, as you, Frank, point out in the phone call this morning, we have quite a big percentage of Italians not voting for the right wing. If only the center left would have formed a coalition, or if only we had a different electoral system, things would have gone a lot different with the same partition of votes that we had.
Do you think that the period of Draghi's administration, in hindsight, was it quite damaging because it sort of ignored politics and turned politics into a kind of managerial exercise rather than reflecting popular opinion?
Some in Italy, they say that there are two major parties, really. If you want to look at two camps that very defined, one is the ones that now believes that Italy can only be governed by experts and technicians, and the other one still believe that there is a political solution to Italy's government. And Meloni represents basically, in fact, she was the only major party in opposition during the Draghi government. Okay, she always, believed in political solutions, which appeals to a lot, which is very popular, and that's also why I guess it appealed to Cosa. Yeah, and so the support of the Draghi government, the parliament that we had a few months ago, it is clear that was not representative of the population will, definitely. And the results are showing this. Salvini participating in Draghi's government was definitely a factor into his demise. Definitely.
Can I just bring up one other subject, which is the question of migration in Italy? And Massi, is this still such a major issue in Italy?
It's not. I haven't heard about that a lot. It's actually, some commentators were saying that Salvini was still leading his campaign, talking about this issue or problem or whatever you want to call it. I see it as just a natural moving of human beings and political circumstances. But he was still addressing it as a something to defeat and to control better. And he was claiming that as a minister intern, he was the only one doing great job on that and managing that. And it's very, very questionable, if not laughable, what he was declaring about this way to handle the issue. And I don't think we perceive it with the same, there was COVID, there is the Ukrainian crisis and the war and the price of bills. So this type of issue was very, very much on a side. And somebody was in fact saying that the fact that he was keep talking about it didn't bring him many more votes than what he could have achieved, speaking about more relevant issues. And his position of criticizing now and elevating Putin figure in the past. So these things, when you contradict yourself, same thing with the 5-Star Movement, when they were a political party, they wanted to be alone, and they formed two governments with all their oppositors. So this is not a thing that you can see as a positive way to behave. And so somebody was saying, Salvini paid for the vote also because he was still talking about an issue that we don't consider as important as it was 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay. Daniele, just another question I have is the COVID response in Italy, which was obviously the first country to introduce the lockdown, where you had very stringent rules against people who were unvaxxed, the Vax Pass, you had talk of mandatory vaccination. Did that play a role in the election?
Overwhelming majority of Italians during the pandemic were actually quite favorable of the handling of the pandemic from the first Conte government, which is also one of the reasons why the 5-Star Movement did well, because of Conte figures as an authoritative figure and the way that he handled such a complex crisis, and people like that. But yes, there is also a big part of Italy that I wouldn't say that they protest on the lockdowns, because as I already said, in Italy there was quite a favorable opinion of the handling of the pandemic, regardless of one position thinks that's the truth, I guess. I think. But the more than anything was the handling of the economy of the pandemic.
Okay.
That was the most difficult. I think the protest that we are seeing here is more of the handling
economic exclusion.
Yes, from one side the economic exclusion, but also now the other side. If you look at the universal basic income, structure that they created. They created, in 2020 during the pandemic, which was like a lifesaver for many people. But at the same time, with the reopening, entrepreneurs anyway, every business after the pandemic, they find themselves reopening with more debts, with less cash, with a huge inflation, and all of these aspects. And now we had one of the best bankers in the world leading the last year of government. We had what they used to call the government of the best, formed by the best technicians around. And what we find ourselves in is a country where bills went up 300%, like everybody else in Europe. From last year, we had a country which many entrepreneurs, as Massi said, complain that they cannot find workers because they earn money with a basic income, and all of these narratives that definitely favored the only party in opposition that there was, which is Fratelli d'Italia. Now, there is also another aspect which is similar to when Trump won the election in the United States. It's quite a similar phenomenon, which is to denigrate a whole section of the population that vote for Meloni. The Meloni's government is traditionally a far-right party. It does have its roots into the social movements of the far-right, inspired from the fascist party. But saying that everybody who votes for Meloni now is a fascist or wants fascism in Italy, it's wrong. Having said that, basically, most of the left-wing campaign was basically conducted on these terms, and that definitely alienated even more people, either from going to vote or either to, or just like, okay, let's actually vote for Meloni.
And on that note, we're going to have to finish. Massimiliano and Daniele, thank you very much. It was great to have you.
Thank you.
To reflect on this. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.